Every door in Coventry is shut. Every window on every street closed and covered, on the orders of the Earl's own wife. She's about to ride through the whole silent town alone. By the time she reaches the far gate, her husband will have already promised to lower what this town owes him in tax. History remembers her as Godiva. Her real name was Godgifu, gift of God, and the truth of her is stranger than the legend. Land held in her own right across 4 counties before she ever married into more, gold and silver given to half the great monasteries of England, and one of the only women's names left standing in a Norman Conqueror's own survey of who now owned his kingdom. She is married by the 1030s to a man named Leofric, one of only 3 earls who really run the England a Danish king conquered a generation before. Leofric holds the Midlands. Godwin of Wessex holds the south and outranks him. A 3rd earl, Seward, holds the north. Between the 3 of them, an English king reigns mostly in name. Godgifu brings something of her own into the marriage, roughly 60 hides of land historians read as her own inheritance, spread across Leicestershire, Warwickshire, Staffordshire and Shropshire. Leofric's family did not otherwise reach. She's not a footnote being added to his story. From the start, she is a landholder in her own right, which is exactly what makes what happens to her name 4 centuries later so strange. In 1043, on ground where a Danish raid had burned a nunnery a generation earlier, Leofric and Godgifu raise a new monastery at Coventry. Later tradition says it was her idea. What the records agree on is that her name is on the gift, not only his. She gives its craftsman, a goldsmith named Manig, gold enough for a reliquary casing and a necklace worth 100 marks of silver, a fortune. Her name recurs on gifts to Stowe, Leominster, Chester, Wenlock, Worcester, Evesham, 6 more religious houses across England, each one a little richer because of her. This is the Godgifu her own century actually knew. Not a woman on a horse, but one of the great religious patrons of the age, at a time when what you gave the church was the clearest way a noble family had to announce both its piety and its power. Leofric's 40 years in power are not calm ones. Godwin of Wessex dominates the king's court, and Leofric spends much of his career alongside Seward as the counterweight to him, a rivalry that very nearly tips into civil war in 1051, before Leofric helps broker a peace through the king's council instead. He dies at his own estate at King's Bromley on the 30th of September, 1057. Godgifu, his widow, is in her 60s. Whatever power she has now, she holds alone. 9 years later, William of Normandy crosses the Channel, and within a few years replaces almost the entire English aristocracy with his own men. Land an English family had held for generations passes in a single generation into Norman hands. Godgifu is one of the rare exceptions. When royal clerks compile the Domesday Survey in 1086, recording who held land in the time of the last English king and who holds it now, her name is still there, one of the only English names and the only woman's, listed as a major landholder from those final years before the conquest took almost everyone else like her. By then, though, she is already gone. The evidence points to her death around 1067, not long after the conquest itself, no exact date recorded. What remains instead is more telling than a date. A woman who spent her life giving fortunes to the church still had enough left, in the last years of Anglo-Saxon England, to be worth naming in the survey of the kingdom that replaced it. Her world is gone. These streets, this monastery, these faces are reconstructed from what the record still holds. If following a life through what survives rather than what was invented about it interests you, consider becoming a channel member. After Domesday, her name disappears from the record. 2 centuries later, someone gives it back to her, just not the way she earned it. For 2 centuries after her death, every mention of Godgifu that survives is about land and treasure given away. Not one of them says anything about a ride. Then, around 1236, as 200 years after her death, a monk named Roger of Wendover, continuing a chronicle at St Albans Abbey, writes it down for the first time. Leofric crushing the town with tolls, Godgifu pleading with him again and again, Leofric setting her an impossible condition he expects her to refuse, and Godgifu taking him at his word. It is the version everyone still tells. It is also almost certainly invented. It surfaces from nowhere, 2 centuries too late, in a chronicle tradition at St Albans already known for embellishing its history for effect. Nothing about the Godgifu the record actually remembers, the land, the monasteries, the goldsmith's work, suggests a woman known locally for a public humiliation. What she was actually known for, before 1236, was how much she gave away. The story did not need to be true to do what it did next. It outlived every real fact about her. By 1678, Coventry's own great fair has turned the story into public spectacle. A procession through crowded streets rather than empty ones. A rider, a boy, the first time it is recorded, not a woman, standing in for Godgifu at the centre of it. A carved wooden figure, already standing in the town for close to 2 centuries by then for reasons no longer clear, finally gets a name and a role of its own only in the century that follows, a tailor who could not resist looking. Coventry's accounts first record paying to repaint him, new paint, a new wig, in 1773. He already has his name, Peeping Tom. In 1842, Alfred Tennyson turns the story into a poem, and 6 centuries of a local legend become a story the whole English-speaking world knows. In 1949, a bronze statue of Godgifu on horseback takes a permanent place in Broadgate, the heart of the city. Not hidden away, set exactly where the whole town still walks past her every day. By the 20th century, Coventry has rebuilt its wealth on bicycles and cars instead of wool. On the night of the 14th of November, 1940, more than 500 German bombers turned that industry into a target. 568 people killed in 11 hours, and the medieval cathedral left a roofless shell, only its tower, spire, and outer walls still standing. The next morning, the cathedral's provost, Dick Howard, makes a choice that costs the city nothing in money and everything in restraint. Not revenge, but reconciliation, even with the nation that just bombed it. Father, forgive. The words he has carved into the ruined wall are still there. A new cathedral rises beside the old one's skeleton rather than replacing it, consecrated in 1962, built deliberately as a symbol rather than a repair. Godgifu, meanwhile, has never stopped being useful to the city that outlived the facts about her. In 1926, a Belgian chocolate maker starts a small pralines company in Brussels. In 1945, his son renames it after her, and within decades it is one of the most recognised luxury brands on earth. Sold on an image of boldness that has almost nothing to do with 60 hides of land in Leicestershire, and everything to do with a story a monk invented 200 years after she died. Twice, 7 centuries apart, this city has been remembered for what it was willing to give up. The second time, there is a wall standing in the ruins that still says so. She gave away more than the legend ever asked of her. It is the legend the world kept.